A single wrong turn by a confused driver changed the destiny of mankind forever. 2 gunshots in a crowded street ended millions of lives before the century was over.
In the dark shadows of 1914 Belgrade, a secret society operated under absolute silence. They called themselves the Black Hand. Inside candlelit basements, young men took blood oaths over a wooden table. Maps of the Austro-Hungarian Empire were marked with heavy black ink. These men were not professional soldiers. They were students, radicals, and outcasts trained by shadowy intelligence officers. They held cold steel pistols and small glass vials filled with deadly cyanide. Their target was clear, monumental, and royal. The heir to the throne was planning a public visit, and the conspirators knew this was their only chance to strike a lethal blow against the empire.
Transporting weapons across heavily guarded imperial borders was an operational nightmare. The conspirators packed heavy iron bombs and small brown pistols into wooden crates hidden beneath piles of dry tobacco leaves. They walked along muddy riverbanks and dense forest paths in the dead of night. Corrupt border guards turned a blind eye as gold coins exchanged hands in dark taverns. Step by step, the lethal cargo moved closer to the city of Sarajevo. The young assassins traveled separately, pretending to be innocent students returning home for the summer. They carried the weight of a catastrophic plot inside their worn leather bags, dodging every uniform they encountered on the gravel roads. The morning sun of June 28 hit the train tracks of Sarajevo railway station. Archduke Franz Ferdinand stepped out of his luxurious train car wearing a bright military uniform decorated with heavy gold braids and large green feathers on his hat. Beside him stood his wife, Sophie, dressed in a long white silk gown holding a lace umbrella. An open-top sports car waited outside the platform, its dark metal chassis polished to a mirror finish. The imperial couple smiled at the gathering local crowds, completely unaware that 7 trained assassins were already standing along the city river embankment, blending into the civilian onlookers with hidden weapons under their heavy coats. The imperial motorcade drove fast along the Appel Quay next to the river. Suddenly, one of the young conspirators stepped out of the crowd, pulled the pin of an iron bomb with his teeth, and hurled it directly at the Archduke's open car. The heavy object bounced off the folded fabric roof and rolled onto the hard stone street. A split second later, a massive explosion shattered the windows of the following vehicle, tearing iron shrapnel through the air and injuring several officers. The crowd screamed as thick gray smoke filled the avenue. The failed assassin quickly swallowed his cyanide vial and jumped over the concrete wall into the shallow river below, but the poison was old and only burned his throat. Instead of fleeing the dangerous city immediately, the furious Archduke demanded to visit his wounded officers at the local hospital. The security team panicked, attempting to alter the route under extreme stress. However, no one explained the new direction clearly to the royal driver. The motorcade accelerated down the original path before an officer shouted to stop. The driver slammed on the mechanical brakes, causing the open-top car to stall directly in front of a crowded corner shop. By pure, terrifying historical coincidence, Gavrilo Princip, another assassin who thought the plot had completely failed, was standing on that exact sidewalk, buying a sandwich at a small food store. Gavrilo Princip looked up and saw the royal target sitting helpless in the stalled vehicle just 5 feet away. He pulled his black pistol from his pocket, stepped off the curb, and turned his face away as he pulled the trigger twice. The first bullet ripped through the thin metal door, piercing Sophie's abdomen. The second bullet struck Franz Ferdinand directly in the neck, severing his jugular vein. Blood covered the red leather seats of the open car. The driver frantically shifted gears to escape, while the crowd tackled Princip to the ground, beating him with heavy wooden canes to wrest the weapon from his bloody hands. As the car raced toward the governor's palace, the Archduke slumped forward, his gold-embroidered jacket soaked in deep crimson. Sophie lay completely unconscious across his knees. Witnesses later stated that Ferdinand whispered continuously to his wife, begging her to stay alive for the sake of their small young children. His voice grew weaker with every passing second as an officer tried to tear open his stiff collar to help him breathe. By the time the vehicle passed through the stone palace gates, both royals were completely motionless. The crown of an empire had fallen in a dirty street, leaving 3 young orphans behind in a distant palace. Inside the stone walls of the Sarajevo police station, Gavrilo Princip sat chained to a heavy iron chair. Strips of blood dried on his pale face from the street beating. Imperial investigators slammed their fists onto the wooden desk, demanding names, dates, and locations. Princip remained silent, his cold blue eyes staring directly into the lens of the police camera. Outside, police officers searched every dark room and attic in the city, dragging young suspects out of bed by their hair. The secret telegram wires between Vienna and Sarajevo were burning with urgent code, demanding to know if the Kingdom of Serbia was directly behind this act of war. When the news reached Vienna, Emperor Franz Joseph received the telegram with trembling hands. The palace went into absolute lockdown, replacing all colorful decorations with heavy black drapes. The imperial generals gathered around a massive oak table covered in military maps. They did not see the assassination as a mere crime, they saw it as the perfect excuse to crush their neighbor, Serbia, once and for all. Diplomatic cables were sent across Europe to secure alliances, ensuring that if war began, the German Empire would back them completely. The machinery of an empire was shifting from peace to total annihilation. On July 23, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to the Serbian government. It contained an ultimatum designed specifically to be rejected. The terms demanded that Serbia allow imperial police to cross the border and run internal investigations, a move that would destroy the nation's independence. Serbia was given exactly 48 hours to respond. Inside the government offices in Belgrade, politicians worked under dim gas lamps through the night, drafting a careful response while outside, citizens panicked, packing their belongings into wooden carts and rushing to banks to withdraw their silver savings before the clock ran out. Serbia accepted almost every single term except the one that violated its sovereignty. It was not enough for Vienna. On July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war. The declaration triggered a catastrophic chain reaction of alliances across the continent. Russia mobilized its massive army of millions along the eastern border to protect Serbia. Germany reacted instantly, declaring war on Russia and marching its troops toward France. Within days, the secret treaties signed in dark rooms over decades forced the global empires into a massive trap from which no nation could escape. Across the capitals of Europe, the sound of church bells was replaced by the loud blast of military trumpets. Factories stopped making civilian goods and began forging long steel bayonets and heavy artillery shells. Millions of young men, factory workers, farmers, and teachers lined up outside recruitment offices, receiving wool uniforms and heavy leather boots. Families stood weeping on train platforms as locomotives packed with young boys pulled away toward the front lines. They cheered and held their rifles high, believing they would return victorious before winter, completely unaware of the industrial meat grinder waiting for them in the mud. The romantic illusions of war died quickly in the mud of the Western Front. Armies dug deep, elaborate networks of trenches into the earth, stretching for hundreds of miles. Between them lay no man's land, a wasteland of cratered mud, sharp barbed wire, and shattered tree stumps. Heavy machine guns opened fire at thousands of rounds per minute, cutting down charging infantry lines in seconds. Soldiers lived with rats in freezing water, listening to the constant roar of explosions that shook the dirt walls day and night. The assassination in Sarajevo had unleashed an industrial nightmare that consumed entire generations. While millions died on the battlefields, Gavrilo Princip sat forgotten inside a dark, freezing concrete cell in the fortress of Terezin. Because he was under 20 years old when he pulled the trigger, imperial law saved him from the gallows, sentencing him to maximum security instead. Chains rubbed against his bones, causing severe infections that slowly destroyed his body. He ate rotten bread in total isolation, listening to the distant thunder of the very war he started. He had wanted to free his people, but instead, his 2 bullets had locked the entire globe into a cage of endless violence and suffering. By 1918, the world that existed before the Sarajevo succast was completely gone. The 4 massive global empires that dominated the earth for centuries lay shattered in pieces. The Austro-Hungarian throne was abolished, its palaces looted and turned into dusty museums. The German Kaiser fled into exile across the border in a closed train car. In Russia, the royal family was dragged into a basement and executed, replaced by a radical new regime. The map of Europe was torn apart and redrawn by politicians in grand palaces, leaving broken economies, millions of dead, and a deep, burning resentment that would pave the way for an even darker future. The physical scars of the conflict slowly healed over decades, but the psychological trauma lasted forever. The Great War proved that human technology could be used to manufacture mass death at an industrial scale. The old world orders that promised stability had failed completely, leaving behind a disillusioned generation of broken veterans who walked the streets with wooden legs and scarred faces. The simple, elegant era of 19th-century peace was buried forever under millions of tons of steel artillery casings, all because a single car driver turned into the wrong alleyway on a hot June morning. Behind closed curtains, the imperial court held a secret trial for the surviving conspirators. Heavily armed guards stood inside the wood-paneled room as the young men were led in one by one. The state prosecutor pointed a trembling finger at the box of captured evidence, including the serial numbers of the pistols that traced directly back to Serbian military warehouses. The judges took hours to read the long verdicts, sentencing the ringleaders to death by hanging. The executioner prepared the heavy hemp ropes in the prison yard at dawn, attempting to bury the truth before the outside world could discover the deep web of international espionage. The real mastermind behind the plot was never caught in that Sarajevo street. Dragutin Dimitrijevic, known by his terrifying codename Apis, was the chief of Serbian military intelligence and the absolute leader of the Black Hand. From his desk in Belgrade, he pulled the strings of puppet assassins across the border, supplying them with untraceable state weapons and cyanide. He was a master of whispers, manipulating international politics to serve his vision of a unified nation. He watched the world burn from his safe office, knowing that his clandestine operational cellular network had achieved exactly what it was engineered to do. Karma caught up with the Shadow Master in the most brutal way possible. In 1917, as the war turned disastrous for Serbia, the government decided to sacrifice Apis to secure a separate peace treaty. He was arrested on false charges of treason by his own politicians. Inside a military tent near the front lines, his former allies turned their backs on him, signing his death warrant without a second thought. Apis was marched to an open ditch at dawn, facing a firing squad composed of his own soldiers. The man who orchestrated the demise of an empire was executed in silence, betrayed by the very nation he tried to build. Long after the last artillery shells fell silent, the street corner in Sarajevo remained a dark place of historical pilgrimage. The footsteps of Gavrilo Princip were cast in concrete on the exact spot where he stood, a permanent mark of the moment history broke in half. The open-top car was placed inside a cold museum hall, its faded red leather and bullet holes staring at quiet tourists. The tragedy proved that the most complex empires are often vulnerable to the simplest mistakes. A stalled engine and a wrong turn cost 40 million casualties, leaving a dark warning for future generations about how fast peace can turn into ash. Today, the river next to the Apel Quay flows silently through Sarajevo, carrying the memories of 1914 down its stream. The old stone bridge still stands, crossing the water where an assassin once jumped into history. The ghost of the Black Hand serves as a grim reminder that dark conspiracies hatched in cellars can overthrow the grandest designs of kings and emperors. When the clock strikes midnight, the echoes of those two fatal shots still resonate through the old avenues of Europe, reminding us that the fragile thread of peace can be severed by a single finger on a cold metal trigger.